You have practically the whole church here.
A lot of familiar faces.
Yeah.
Laura, you can just tell me from experience when you think I should start.
Oh, I think you should go ahead. Yeah. It's,
Okay.
oh, yeah. Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. I want to say, first of all, if I seem just a little more loopy than usual, it's because I've been without air conditioning in my apartment for 4 days and nights.
Oh, no.
And yesterday and last night were just awful. So, depending on whose story you believe, this is either our 29th or our 30th anniversary.
I vote for 30th.
It is, yeah. Just a little over 30 years ago was when Bishop Epting first called Elisabeth to be the founding priest of the church. And in later October of 30 years ago,
John, for once in your life, watch the glasses as a prop because you're hitting the mic.
Just once.
I just figured if I kept them out there, that Elisabeth, as is her tendency, would grab them and start doing imitations of me. Okay, so it was later in October 30 years ago that Elisabeth and Bishop Epting double-teamed me and wrestled me to the ground and said I was going to be a partner in this venture. I want to go back just quite a ways before that, actually, to just give you some context. Walter Reiter, who was our bishop before Chris, 72 to 89, presided over the closure of an incredible number of Iowa churches. Just little county seat towns that were being diminished, particularly in western Iowa. And it had been quite some time since a new congregation had been started. So I was on the board of directors in the mid-'80s when he and we decided to commission a demographic study of where the ideal place would be to plant a new church. And they spent a whole lot of money, a whole lot of time investing in that, decided that the two most logical places were in the Coralville North Liberty corridor and in Dallas County, west of Des Moines, actually out past West Des Moines, two fastest growing, high professional, high income. I do need to say that the results of this study show that this was an ideal place because it was full of highly educated, high salary people who were all kind of associated with technology, particularly with the new Oakdale Research Campus. They were young, they were just starting families, they were not churched, but they might want to be churched for the sake of their children. And I just have to say flatly that 30 years later, we've never seen that family come through our doors yet. Everything else under the sun. So Elisabeth and I, beginning just almost 30 years ago, started a planning process. We did an enormous amount of reading and of watching tapes of church planting programs. I used to come to your house in Muscatine and we'd sit in the basement and watch all of those pearls of wisdom come out of these tapes. And, little by little it took shape. In January of '94, we rented an office, which was on 5th Street, just right across the street from the duck pond. And we outfitted it. There's some wonderful stories about that. We hired an office person. We started having little worship services, Eucharist there, shortly after we opened. Cindy Harrington and Jerry Howe are the only two current members who were part of that group that gathered to worship, usually there. There were maybe 10 of us. And as we went down the road, there were several things that were big critical decisions. One of them was that we would do a phone bank, that we would buy lists of phones in this immediate area. And so through that spring, we established 4 phone banks in Council Bluffs, Des Moines, our office in Coralville, and in Davenport. And we enlisted people from all over the diocese to come and do calling every night. And we called 39,000 and some phone numbers. And the approach was a very simple, no-pressure one. Are you churched? Are you interested in being churched? This is what we're starting. Would you like to have more information? So out of that, I think we got a mailing list of several hundred. The other thing was that Elisabeth and I commissioned ourselves and each other maybe to go around the diocese every Sunday that summer and preach. And to tell people what our venture was, to enlist their prayers, their support of various kinds. And that was actually my first preaching experience ever in strange, unfamiliar churches. And Elisabeth had a connection with a lovely quarry in Muscatine and brought in these beautiful rocks, just tons of rocks. And every Sunday we'd start out with a car trunk full of rocks we never went to the same place, and set them out. And we kind of fudged the scriptures every Sunday so we could kind of concentrate on the Matthew passage on this rock I will build my church. And we asked people when they left to just pick up a rock that appealed to them and put it in some visible place in their house.
And I know people who still have it.
Yes. And to pray for us every time they saw the rock. And damn it, 25 years later, going around the diocese, people will say, I remember you, you're the rock guy. But out of that, we developed a list of, I can't remember, maybe a couple hundred people we called prayer companions, whom we sent out regular information to and who prayed for us and sent us money. I think in the beginning we were pretty well funded by the diocese on a kind of declining 5-year basis. And so as the time approached, we gathered what we vaguely called a bishop's committee that was mostly clergy. Was Jason Parkin from Trinity, Iowa City, and Gary Coffey from St. John's, Cedar Rapids, and Julia Easley occasionally, and Ellen Bruckner from St. Michael's in Cedar Rapids, not clergy, but diocesan leader. And so that was basically our planning group. And then we had... Pardon?
Was Ann with you at the time?
No. Ann wasn't even with us at our service beginnings because she was still on the vestry at Trinity. So she didn't come here till about a year after our founding. But through that group, we established, I think the most important thing was a set of values by which we would conduct ourselves, that we would be totally open, affirming, supportive to people of all races, ethnicities, genders, orientations, socioeconomic status. And over the years, we've seen minorities in every one of those categories as members. And we decided in any number of ways that we didn't want to be the traditional Episcopal Church. I mean, back in those days, the most common term for Episcopal churches was the frozen chosen. And it was pretty stratified. Wealthy, white, conservative. So we started with that basis. Elisabeth individually prayed long and hard and thought long and hard, and ultimately proposed the name of New Song. And we all instantly loved it. Except for the bishop. Go ahead. See, I knew she couldn't get very far before. No, go ahead.
Well, he was sort of appalled that we would not be using something Roman Catholic or
Grace or Christ.
Yep. Anyway, he sort of put his foot down a little bit, but not real hard, and he just said, I really don't like that so much. And why haven't you thought about da-da-da-da-da-da? And we said, well, no, we like New Song. And so he said, well, it is then. Go do it.
Okay.
So,
Bishop, you say?
Bishop
Epting.
Epting, yes.
so that's all we needed. And
By the way, the article on the naming
Yeah.
is this week.
yes, it is.
So, as we continued that discussion with our core values as the base, we decided we wanted to be new in any number of other ways. That we did not want to have pews, we didn't want to have an organ, we didn't want to have kneelers, that we wanted to use, very contemporary, at that time, experimental liturgies. And so we went into it with that. We had a separate group from the Bishop's Committee, people who kind of became our members long before our first service. That included Cindy and Jerry, who met in our office on Fifth Street for occasional worship and discussion about where we were going. And ultimately, we sent out several mailings to all of the people who had responded to our phone bank calls positively. And then we, for better or worse, leased a space in the Westfield Inn in Coralville.
It was worse.
It is. See, I told you, great comedy team. The Westfield was at Highway 365 and Holiday Road. It subsequently became a Ramada Inn, and then by popular demand, it got bulldozed. I cannot begin to tell you the awful things about it, but we had the ballroom.
Now tell about the first service.
Okay. I think a lot of people already know this story, but
Probably not everyone here.
No.
among the many things that we had studied in church planting programs was the thought that people didn't want a bunch of paper in front of them. They particularly didn't want prayer books that they had to flip back and forth. And that the easiest, most positive thing would be to put the service, the music and everything else on slides and project them on a great big screen in front. So here we are in this ballroom. It is glorious. That first service just blew us away. About 275 people. We had a full choir from St. John's, Cedar Rapids. We had a brass sextet. We had a composer in Cedar Rapids who was commissioned to write an anthem. And it just couldn't have been more glorious. And Elisabeth and I started down this aisle in procession, side by side. And people were just singing lustily and joyfully, and on we went. And about 10 seconds into the second verse, the singing just stopped. And we looked at each other and just kept going and thinking, what's going on here? And we
My
got,
husband was running the,
yes,
yeah.
her husband was running the slides. We got all the way up. We had an altar on the parquet dance floor of this ballroom, which had about that much dried beer and soft drinks, so that when we preached, we were kept lifting our feet like that so we wouldn't get permanently stuck. But we got all the way around to the other side of the altar, and everybody started singing again, just loudly and wonderfully, and all the way through that. We did not know until after the end of the service that the second verse was being projected on our butts as we walked down the aisle.
That's true.
Nobody had given a whole lot of attention to the angles of that projector. So we learned a great lesson there.
But they did keep singing.
We wondered who those people were on their knees following us down the aisle. Anyway, wonderful start. Elisabeth and I were just discussing last weekend, I think it was the second Sunday, right? That
Oh, yeah.
Elisabeth preached an AIDS sermon, and that pretty much called out from those 275 people who would be comfortable here and who wouldn't. And
Well, and parents raced into, at the end of the service. They kindly waited till then, but then they raced into the service, grabbed their children, and ran out of the place.
so that,
What?
That would happen again today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think.
Was
But
it
it
your
was
kids?
on AIDS.
On AIDS. Yeah.
I just had a memory of John Grieve's son falling into the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was at the first service too.
Yeah, and then
Actually,
Jan's daughter lit the Advent wreath on fire, but when she was trying to be acolyte.
Yeah.
actually, that was a fountain in the
Yeah.
lobby that Jack fell into.
Elizabeth grabbed her glass of water and poured it on the Advent wreath.
But that place was so awful, so inhospitable. I mean, I could spend the rest of the hour just on that.
Don't.
But see, told ya. But, you know, they had failed to tell us things like, you can't have this space for Mother's Day or Easter or Thanksgiving or Christmas because we want our big buffet in here. So, you know, it was little things like that. We were always given 2 hotel rooms every Sunday, one for vesting and one for the nursery. We occasionally found one of them flooded. One day we found our nursery with a broken toilet sitting on the bed. And, you know, just awful, hostile management. So the minute we could get out of there, when the weather got nice in the spring of '95, we started worshiping in the shelter in Morrison Park
At the pond.
by the duck pound,
The ducks.
which was directly across from our office.
They didn't like sermons.
Yes,
The ducks
the
didn't like
ducks
sermons.
didn't. And so we were there through the spring and summer while we were looking for a new location. And up popped our second home, which was the Millennium Plaza on the Coralville Strip, which is in the 800 block, I think. It shares part of a parking lot with the Dairy Queen there.
Now it's a car wash.
Yeah,
Oh, it's a car wash.
yeah, they just tore it down.
Another very, very interesting place. We at least had a great landlord, but the place was always under construction, or the parking lot was being repaved or something.
And it was like singing in a sock.
Okay.
Horrible.
Yeah. But, you know, it had been an insurance office. We had to do an enormous amount of sweat equity to create a big enough space for worship there. And so we were there from '95 to 2001. Everything constantly changing around us. And on the second floor, I mean, places on either side of us and above us were all leased to other businesses and concerns of various kinds. But great big New Song sign over our first floor door, and directly over that, Madame Lazora, fortune teller, psychic. So, we always told people if, you know, if they couldn't get their spiritual questions answered through us, just walk up the stairs. But that was on the whole a very, very good place.
The kids loved it.
The kids loved it. I just want to stop for one teeny story.
Teeny.
You see why we parted company 20 years ago? We had a separate kids' classroom clear in the back, and in the, I should say from very early on, we had a lot of assistance from Suzanne Watson, who then became Suzanne Watson Epting, who was the first deacon of the modern era of Iowa. And Suzanne often led those little kids. And Michael Grieve, when he was about 3 years old, came up to me after the service and said, first of all, I should say the whole back wall of that classroom was just crawling with box elder bugs. John Hopper, I want to show you what Suzanne taught us today about protecting all of God's creatures. We take these things very carefully, just like this in our hands, and we take them all the way out to the outdoors where they can have a good, happy life, and we let them down in the parking lot very carefully.
3-year-old.
Yeah. They were the best. So it became apparent that we couldn't be there forever. And in 2001, this building was on the market. It was a long abandoned church of a Pentecostal sect based in Missouri. And to the best of our knowledge, the pastor had run off with all the funds. And the denomination had just come in and padlocked it. And I don't know how many years it was until we saw it for the first time. But it looked just like it had on the final Sunday. The bulletins were still in the pews. The kids' coloring books were still on the floor.
Well, and whatever that baptism thing was along the wall.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to describe that in a minute.
Okay.
But there were half-full coffee cups around the kitchen from years before that were full of colors I'd never seen before. It's just awful. Anyway, quick physical description. You walk in the front door, there's a very wide set of steps right inside the door going down to the lower level. Basically where our lift is now. Worship was all facing this wall, so there were a limited number of just huge long rows going from end to end here. Right about over there where John and Jim are sitting was the pulpit, and it was way up with steps going up to it. And then behind that, there were, of course, no shutters there. That was the baptismal tub, because this was a full immersion denomination. So we had an enormous amount that we had to do to get this place into conformity. The stairs over there at that end didn't exist. We had to create those, do a ramp, take a fair amount of open space downstairs and convert it into a second and fully handicapped bathroom. But we, again, an enormous amount of sweat equity. And that process of preparing this building went on for several years, really.
And it was up to the I mean, we had a few professional things, but mostly it was up to all of us to get it done.
Yes.
And I want to add that at the time, we had maybe 3 or 4 able-bodied men as part of the congregation. So it was the mighty women of the New Song who really made things happen.
Indeed.
I have a question. Was this purpose-built as a church then? Do you know?
We don't know, really.
It was a daycare.
It was a daycare originally.
Well,
Okay.
but it was both. It was
So
a
it's
church
both.
upstairs, daycare downstairs. Oh, okay.
One, it was not vacant for years and years before we saw it. It was vacant for about a year to 6 months before we saw it.
Okay.
And yes, it was a total mess when we first took over. So, and I don't know if it was originally, I believe it was built as some kind of church maybe originally, because it was always open space like this. It wasn't ever like a home or anything like that.
Okay.
But we had to fight a lot with the city for certain aspects of what we had to do to the building and to parking. And at that point in time, Manor Park was across the street, so we had a written agreement with them for some additional parking that kept the city happy, so we have enough handicap parking and all that. So that's my 2 bits as the realtor.
Okay.
Thanks, Gerald.
That takes me back some time to our beginnings, where we decided it was very important to be visible in the community in terms of social services. And we had an elderly woman, African-American woman named Byford Baker, who was pretty aggressive in that discussion and convinced us that our primary thing should be Lantern Park Care Center. We were not across the street from them at the time, but from that point on, for years, we did a regular monthly worship service. I used to do an occasional Eucharist there on weekday mornings. And we did Christmas programs. Bingo. Visitations of people. That was an important outlet to us. And otherwise, we were all over the map, but we were certainly founded on a principle that we wanted to be very active in the community. I think the other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning was that I wanted a different ministry partner. Got vetoed. How important it was to us as part of that paradigm to be sure that every member knew they were a minister and claimed a ministry. And in the early days, we used to commemorate those on Sundays all the time. We used to commission and recognize all of the choir members or the older ministers or the buildings and grounds people. So it was clear to everybody all the time that those were ministries and that everybody here should have one and that no particular area belonged to any specific person or groups of people. And you can still see that in our annual pledge campaign, where we have a sheet of, what do you want to pledge for your ministry for the year to come? That all grew out of our founding.
And there were lay ministers, or lay preachers very early on, too.
Yes.
I was the first
Elisabeth and I actually co-taught 2 classes full of potential lay preachers. And at one time, at the height of things, I think we had 10 or 12. But that was something that really distinguished us, I think, from other congregations generally. We had a commissioning ceremony of consecrating this building in the summer of 2002, which was done by Bishop Tom Ray of Diocese of Northern Michigan, who was our interim bishop between Chris Epting and Alan Scarf. And things evolved ever since. And
I don't remember being invited to that.
huh.
I've been busy, it was a Sunday morning.
I remember a lengthy discussion about you. I don't know how it turned out.
What month was it?
It was in the summer of 2002.
I was here.
Okay.
Oops.
Well, it was
Sorry.
it was not like we invited any clergy from outside that I recall.
No. We just had the bishop from.
We just had Bishop Ray, and we marched up and down the street, and he knocked on the door and went through the whole 9 yards.
So during the time you were fixing it up, you were still in Millennium Plaza building, right? Or did you move in while it was still in use or under renovation?
Yes, we were in over
We
there.
were in the
Okay.
Millennium Plaza at
Yeah.
least until we got up to code. Now, for years thereafter, particularly David Thayer used to constantly have projects. For example, there really wasn't much protection of the basement walls on this end of the building downstairs. There used to be frost inside those walls occasionally. So, and a lot of creation of storage space, and the lower level has changed in configuration over time.
Quite a bit. I lived next door years ago to Bob Check. Some of you may know Bob as a contractor here, and he took interest in what was going on, and he often did some stuff just because he was doing it. And so we did get some help there, and it was much appreciated. And he did a good job.
So from that point on, Elisabeth and I continued as the sole partnered clergy until she retired in the end of 2005, I think. And from that point on, we had 2 kind of parallel lines of development. One was a whole series of interims, which began with Julia Easley and then proceeded to 2 ELCA Lutheran pastors, Vicki Peterson and Cindy Breed.
And Martha Lang.
Martha Lang. Well,
I can't remember what year she was ordained, but she was on the road to
Well, she-
ordination, and she was ordained deacon and then eventually priest.
but the whole time she was here, she was a deacon.
Yes.
And at the same time, we fell into the trap of becoming the first congregation to use Bishop Scarf's new paradigm of ministry development teams.
Yeah. You're getting
And-
past us now.
Pardon?
You're getting past us now.
Getting past what?
Getting past history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is it you want me to go?
You don't want to know.
I haven't heard the term mutual ministry. Maybe that's a good place.
I thought I.
Shared.
Pardon?
We talked about shared.
Yes. Right. I don't know why you haven't heard the term, because I think we used it a lot.
Yeah.
Today?
No, not today.
They talked about it, just not with that term. I do remember a large meeting that you guys started on care, and pastoral care was a big focus. But I don't know if that was before or after what John's talking about.
I'm sorry, for care?
Care, pastoral care.
Oh, pastoral care, yes.
That.
Yeah, I mean, from time to time, new things evolved just simply on the basis of who our members were and what particular gifts they brought. We had a great pastoral care team. At one point, we had a parish nurse program, all kinds of things. At any rate, we called a first ministry development team of 8 people, and that started in the late summer of 2004. And people could commend each other's names, and then the bishop would call people who had several commendations and talk to them about what was involved here. But it was a 4 to 5 year program
We gotta go.
that met every week.
Taking too much time.
Well,
We are taking too much time.
I mean, I can quit any time.
Good.
I'm just not. You see what I had to endure? I was just thinking of, throughout that period, think of how many women clergy I served with. And, we had, as I said, Suzanne Watson and Martha Lang, and Willa Goodfellow was part of us for quite a while, and then Vicki and Cindy. And I have strong, pardon? Catherine Quellingle. But I have a strong recollection of a time right in the middle of that when Bob Holzheimer, the long retired rector of Trinity, came and did the service. And since I was the announcement guy at the end, I said, I want this to be a learning experience for all of you, because probably you weren't aware that in the Episcopal Church, men can be priests too. Because nobody here had ever seen one before that.
I have a quick question. Who decided that you two would become a team? Bishop Epting, or was that
I believe it was Elizabeth.
your choice, Elizabeth, to go with him? Or because I know that he.
I think the devil did it.
No, whose choice was it that the two of you worked together?
Okay, if I could back up maybe
No.
two years.
Elizabeth, we normally go to 12:30, so.
Oh, you do? Oh, well, you have 10 minutes.
We might need
telling two different stories at this point.
You know, anytime she was sitting up here, she was always in charge. But maybe 2 years before our founding, she was in seminary at Seabury Western, and everybody in seminaries has a midler year when they go out and do a kind of internship in a congregation. And so, whatever year that was, she came to Trinity, Iowa City for her internship. And so we got to know each other a little bit, and I even remember going out to lunch together one day and telling her that I was kind of agonizing over my own potential calling. And so we were vaguely acquainted before then, but it just happened that we were being ordained to our respective orders fairly close together, and that we were both in this geographic area. And Elisabeth can tell you, I know that her calling and her response to that call came first, and I think did not involve me at that very moment. But in her meetings with Chris Epting, my name came up.
Over and over.
Over. And you know, while she was already kind of starting down the road to the planning of New Song, I spent all of September in the hospital with the worst thing I ever had, being told I was going to die a couple of times. And so going to the diocesan convention in October of that year was the first time I'd ever been out very far since I got out of the hospital. So the two of them at diocesan convention kind of preyed on my weakness and got me. Pardon?
Is that P-R-E-Y or P-R-E-Y?
Yes.
Probably both.
A little of both, John. But you know, I agreed at that point, right around the end of October of '93, that I would be part of this team. And the rest is just disastrous history. I don't know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On that, Elizabeth. When Dorothy and I first came here 6 years ago or something like that, the liturgy, we had a Goldilocks moment with the liturgy here because it wasn't too high, it wasn't too low, it just fit us perfect. How did you come over the years to that genius compromise?
Well, we knew from the beginning that we didn't want to use prayer book liturgies, except for special days here and there. And there was, at the time we started, just the beginnings of what the church called trial liturgies.
Trial liturgy.
More modern language, more non-sexist language. So basically things evolved around that. And one more thing about Suzanne Watson-Epting. She wrote the formats of so many of the prayers that we used for a long time and occasionally use now. That was one of her special geniuses. So, you know, and we also knew musically that we didn't want to be out of old 1940 hymnals. And so we used a lot of stuff from Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I have to say, the music today was so moving.
Oh, wasn't that wonderful?
Thank you
Yeah.
to Linda and to Stephanie.
He's had his hand up for a while.
Yay.
I know John would like to get into the whole ministry development team, the good parts of it, the really crummy parts of it. But I do have one quick question. What has been the highlight of the 29 or 30 years for each of you? In a couple of sentences, what has New Song meant to you over that many years?
Tonight,
What?
or this afternoon.
Or just any time.
No, today.
Today, just being here and reminiscing over 30 years.
Yeah.
She said, we couldn't hear it. You said,
Today.
She said
Today.
today was her highlight.
I haven't been here for a while. And so I've been here since, I have been here, but not regularly. And so today, with all of you coming, was just spectacular.
I
And
don't
I'm
know.
grateful. I'm grateful.
I don't know quite how to narrow it down. I think the first service for me was something very special, very memorable. And otherwise, I would skip all the way to the ordination day of Jane and Jennifer and John, which was in Old Brick, and I was the master of ceremonies.
And we got out on time.
Well, that was not an accident because at that time I lived in Palm Springs.
Oh,
And it was the middle
See?
of January and it was well below zero. And it was the only time in, my 12, 13 years in Palm Springs that I ever came back during the winter for a reason.
yes.
So I was so anxious to get back on that plane and back to my other home that's why it stopped on time. Any more?
Asking how I ever got involved with this. Because I was Roman Catholic for about the first 10 years of New Song's existence before Elisabeth and John just beat the crap out of me and started me accepted into the Episcopal Church. I started with Chuck and Elisabeth showing them houses. They wanted everything on one level, maybe a nice condo. What they bought was 3 levels deep. Still a standing joke. I was part of the first bishops committee, and they were spending hours talking about adult formation and child formation and XYZ, and I said, wait, you guys want to have a service in 3 weeks? Where are you going to have it at? So I was unfortunately part of probably finding Westfield in, but it was the only place we could afford. It was the only place that was available. We tried looking at all the school auditoriums and everything. We couldn't find anything but that. And then I was instrumental in finding Millennium Plaza, and which, you could watch the cars go by from the football games on a Sunday morning as we were having service. And then when this came available, we took a leap of faith and it worked out.
It did.
When Elisabeth and I were talking last Sunday about our memories of Millennium Plaza, one of my favorites that I brought up at the time was Easter Sunday with Bill Coopersmith dressed in a total bunny suit out on the highway passing out eggs to passerby cars.
Photographic evidence for those of you who doubt it just couldn't possibly
Oh God, I hope there is.
My favorite thing, Millennium Plaza, this beautiful colored wall. Elizabeth has an interior decorator and a blanket underneath.
Rochelle Conway.
Yeah. And so this color, Elizabeth and she spent hours debating and all that. But when we were doing Millennium Plaza, there was supposed to be wallpaper in this kitchen area. And when it got put up, it was the wrong number. So here was this god-awful country flower basket wallpaper in the kitchen of Millennium Plaza. And if you know Elisabeth, like we know Elisabeth, she about had a coronary. She walked in and saw that. But, you know, it was too late. We were going to spend money to replace it. So a lot of this look and design is from that when we first moved in here years ago.
I was also reminded that once we had our first service and we were in business, we had to form a brand new bishops' committee made of attendees and people who said they wanted to be members. And as I recall, there were maybe 10 to 12 on that committee, but only one, I think, was an actual confirmed Episcopalian. We had a little bit of everything else, including, in addition to Jerry, I think there were 2 or 3 Catholics. So we kind of ran around the edges of the canons for quite some time.
But one other question.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
One other question.
Thank you.
What do you want New Song to be in the future?
Cindy.
You guys,
You are kind.
I want it to be still founded on the principles that they started, because that's what I love about New Song.
Thank you. All right, you have been patient.
Yay.
Well, thank you both for founding a community that has given so much to so many people through the years.
Thank you.
Validated.
Thank you.